With our expert model, we could see our goal. The goal for our participants is to be able to complete a deadlift to improve strength, explosiveness, functionality of muscles being used, and to increase muscle hypertrophy. An additional goal is to progress through the following cues without imbalances in stability for lifting form in order to prevent injuries to the posterior chain. Starting with critical feature 1, optimal starting position. Feet should be placed hip width apart with toes angled outward, hips hinged about 90 to 120 degrees for optimal use of glutes and hamstrings, and the spine stays straight for the entirety of the lift. Moving on to critical feature 2, the bracing of the core muscles. Abdomen should be braced alongside with the spinal erectors to maintain a straight back to prevent excessive spinal flexion or extension. Moving forward to critical feature 3, hip extension/drive. Push through the feet to start extending knees and hips. Knees joints should simultaneously extend with a full repetition. Looking at critical feature 4, shoulder and upper back position. As the bar continues to raise vertically, retract scapula, rhomboids, trapezius to promote stability for the spine. Lastly, we have critical feature 5, a controlled eccentric. We begin by lowering the weight by hinging the hips and pushing the glutes backwards. This brings us to video session 1 with our participant Nathan. Unfortunately, at the beginning, he had many weaknesses. Weak starting position, shoulder and upper back position, and the wrong bracing of the core. On the bright side, he had multiple strengths, including hip extension, which is his drive, lockout full extension, and a good controlled eccentric. When choosing which area to correct first, we'll start with his starting position. This brings us to intervention session 1. Session 1, we use reciprocal style. In this style, we use cue words such as keep your back straight, modeling, and giving him feedback of where to place his hands and what needs to be corrected. This brings us to our next session, the next day. He came back strong and retained a lot of the information from the previous day. He showed strengths such as hip extension, shoulder and upper back position, his lockout, and a controlled eccentric. On the other hand, his weaknesses were a weak starting position and failed to brace his core at the beginning. Because Nathan was still very new to this movement, we stuck with the reciprocal style for intervention session 2. We kept using keywords such as keep the core tight and use modeling to show him where to focus again. Moving forward, we skip a week. He came back and went back to his old habits, showing weaknesses of a weak starting position. His shoulder and upper back position was incorrect, and he still forgot to brace the core. The main error here is his weak starting position with his hands again. His hand placement causes the whole movement to be unstable. On the bright side, he still retains some strengths. This brings us to intervention session 3. For this session, we use command style. All cues will be given and told by the instructor, and he will be commanded on what to fix immediately. This brings us to video session 4. He came back stronger than ever. He had multiple strengths, including hip extension, full lockout, extension, a controlled eccentric, an optimal starting position, shoulder and upper back position, with his only weakness being forgetting to brace his abdomen. Due to Nathan's rapid progress, for intervention 4, we chose practice style. With the practice style, he has private practice, task repetition, and increased time on task. Here, he tried on his own to perform 5 full repetitions of a deadlift, keeping in mind all the cues that have been given to him. Excellent work by Nathan here. Lastly, this brings us to video session 5. Nathan proved that he had a full understanding of how to perform this movement now. All his strengths were showing, and his only weakness was still that he forgets to brace his core, but with a little bit of reminding, he was able to get it done. Since Nathan had a full understanding of the movement now, for intervention session 5, he used the self-check style, gaining independence, recording himself, and correcting his own task performance. At the end, we can compare Nathan's progress from video session 1 to video session 5. In video session 1, he had multiple weaknesses, with a weak starting position, shoulder and upper back position, and the bracing of his core. Come video session 5, he turned all those weaknesses into strengths, alongside other critical features such as the hip extension, drive, lockout, control the centric, and starting position. Now he is able to complete a deadlift to improve strength, explosiveness, functionality of muscles being used, and to increase muscle hypertrophy. He also achieved the goal in progressing through the following cues without imbalances in stability of lifting form in order to prevent injuries to the posterior chain.
On video session 1, we have the weaknesses, which is poor hip hinge, poor knee flexion, and pace is too fast. The strength on this is having a good grip, great back positioning, and good impulse. For intervention session 1, I used a reciprocal style. I used keywords like lower your hip more and demoing the action and performing the actual exercise to show the participant. For video session 2, the weaknesses were a wrong starting body positioning and arms were too wide. The strengths were good grip. He had a good impulse as well, which was very helpful for the deadlift, and also good knee flexion. For intervention session 2, I used a reciprocal style as well because he needed some demoing to see how to perform correctly the exercise. So I felt like I had to show him again. So I used keywords like pay attention to the bar marks, and I also showed him how to do it properly. For video session 3, his weaknesses were a reflection of his knees. His hip was too low, and his hand placement were too narrow. His strengths were good grip and good impulse. For this intervention session 3, I used a command style. I used keywords like keep back straight and do not lower it too much. I provided him some instructions in order to fix his errors. For video session 4, his weaknesses were a little bit fewer than before, but his legs were too wide open. But he had a lot of strengths, like great impulse, knee flexion is amazing, and his hand grip is correct. The hip positioning is fine as well. The intervention session for this one was self-check style. He became more independent with this with the type of teaching. Less instructions were given, and he had a great self-corrections. For video session 5, his weaknesses were even less than before. His weakness was that he was not keeping his head straight up. And his strengths were he had a great impulse, knee flexion was great, his hand grip is correct, and the hip positioning is fine as well. For intervention session number 5, I used a inclusion style. I modified the exercise using another type of weight, but doing the same exercise, the same principles, and also I made him use a lighter weight.
For our last participant, I have him start with just a bar and no weights added. In the first session, he displays weaknesses such as upper body and lower positioning, weak starting position, and failure to brace the core. During the first intervention, I used inclusion teaching style by using keywords such as keep back straight and hand placement body width apart. We'll then see him adjust his position as he follows the cues I just gave him. So here you see me demonstrating and telling him the cues that I just mentioned, and he will add this to what he has learned. Awesome. For the next session, we can see that he still has problems with his starting position, but has improved in his upper and lower body position, as well as good hip extension and control and eccentric control. Using the reciprocal style of teaching, I tell the participant cues such as hand placement body width apart and feet shoulder width apart as used before. Then I demonstrate him what I mean by these cues. Here we can see the placement of the hands and the feet being shoulder width apart, and now I'm allowing him to apply those cues to what he's learned. See, we can see the distance between his feet and his hands. In session 3, after a couple days, we see a difference, this time with weights added. His weaknesses consist of the failure to bracing core, upper back position, which was too rounded, but his strengths have been focused on his hand position. He has been able to control it eccentrically and full hip extension. To fix this, I use command style of teaching, which are cues given by the instructor and tell him what needs to be fixed immediately. And in this case, it was his back, as I mentioned, was too rounded. So here I see him. I told him what needs to be done without actually demonstrating and grabbing the bar, and he took what I told him and applied to his movement. For the 4th video session, we see improvement with strengths such as full hip extension, upper body and shoulder position, and knee flexion and extension, but still has a weakness in the starting position. Command style would be used again, and here I told him what he needed to fix right away. So again, as mentioned before, command style is just telling him what needs to be fixed instead of actually grabbing the bar and doing it for him. And then right here, this is where he applies what I've told him. Now for the final day, which took place a couple days after, we can see his strengths being shown. Those strengths consist of hip extension, lockout, and full extension, controlled eccentric, the bracing of the core, shoulder and upper body position, but he still has the same weakness. This time I use self-check, which is used as a way to gain independence and correct one's tasks. In this case, I took a video of him and showed him his mistakes, and he was able to see where he was going wrong. So this way he was able to see himself and fix what he needed to do. Now here is the slow-mos to show the progress from day 1 video session to day 5 video session. So here we show session 1. We can see the improvement starting from here. If you remember from session 1, he did have problems a lot with his bag, placement, starting position. And as we move to video session 5, which is for the final day, which should be coming up right now. Here in video 5, we can see the improvement coming from Gio as he performs the deadlifts. So here, as mentioned before, his strengths have consisted of full hip extension, lockout full extension, eccentric control, bracing core, shoulder and upper body position. And this is a good job for Gio.